In the 1980s, in the quiet, windswept county of Pembrokeshire, Wales, two sisters lived in a profound and unsettling silence. They were twins, June and Jennifer Gibbons, and they refused to speak to anyone in the world. Not to their parents, not to their siblings, not to their teachers or their doctors. They would not speak to anyone, except each other. When they were alone, they spoke in a rapid-fire private language that no one else could understand. But in the presence of others, they were like living statues, their movements synchronized, their eyes downcast, locked together in a pact of silence that was as unbreakable as it was terrifying. They were born as two, but they lived as one, a single soul trapped in two bodies. Their bond was so intense, so possessive, that it would eventually lead them down a path of creativity, crime, and madness. It was a bond that dictated that for one to truly live, the other would have to die. This is the story of the Silent Twins, a case that remains one of the most baffling and tragic psychological mysteries of the 20th century. A story that forces us to question the very nature of identity, love, and the chilling darkness that can exist within the most intimate of human connections. The story of the Silent Twins is a journey into a world sealed off from our own, a world of secret languages, violent passions, and cryptic prophecies. It's a story that has haunted psychologists and writers for decades, and it's one that will likely stay with you long after you've heard it. If you're fascinated by the deep, dark corners of human history and the mysteries that defy easy explanation, consider subscribing to this channel for more stories just like this one. We'd also love to know where in the world you're watching from and what your initial thoughts are on this truly bizarre case. Let us know in the comments below. For now, let us revel back to the beginning, to a time before the silence fell, to understand how this suffocating pact was forged. The story begins not in the rain-soaked hills of Wales, but under the warm tropical sun of the Caribbean. Their father, Aubrey Gibbons, was a quiet, disciplined man who worked as a technician for the Royal Air Force. He and his wife Gloria were part of the Windrush generation, immigrants from Barbados who had come to the United Kingdom seeking opportunity and a new life. Aubrey's job meant the family moved frequently, a constant state of uprooting that would become a defining feature of their children's early lives. June and Jennifer were born on April 11, 1963, at a military hospital in Aden, Yemen, where Aubrey was stationed. Jennifer arrived 10 minutes before June, a small detail that would later take on a mythic significance in their private world. From the very beginning, they were inseparable. As toddlers, they were happy and talkative, chattering away in the Bajan Creole dialect they heard from their parents. They were noticeably close, but not in a way that initially raised any alarm. The bond between twins is often intense, a mirror image relationship that the outside world can only guess at. But with June and Jennifer, this bond was already beginning to show signs of something different, something more exclusive and consuming. The family's transfer to the UK marked the first significant fracture in the twins' world. They settled first in Linton, Yorkshire, before Aubrey was stationed at RAF Chivanor in Devon. It was here that the Gibbons family, the only black family in the community, became targets of relentless prejudice. For the young twins, this was a brutal and confusing introduction to their new home. At school, they were singled out, bullied, and mocked for their race and their quiet demeanor. The other children would taunt them, pull their hair, and chant cruel rhymes. This constant barrage of hostility from the outside world seemed to push them further inward. Reinforcing the idea that the only safe place was with each other, they began to retreat, their speech slowing down until it was almost unintelligible to their teachers. They would cling to one another on the playground, two small figures forming a united front against a world they were learning to fear and mistrust. The school authorities noticed their lack of communication and referred them to a series of child psychologists and therapists. But the sessions were fruitless. The girls would simply sit in silence, their gazes fixed, refusing to engage. No diagnosis seemed to fit perfectly. They weren't deaf. They weren't intellectually disabled. In fact, tests showed they had above-average intelligence. They simply chose not to speak. It was a conscious act of will, a silent protest against a world that had made them feel like unwelcome outsiders. The decisive move came in 1974, when the family relocated to Haverfordwest, a small predominantly white market town in Wales. If they had hoped for a fresh start, they were to be cruelly disappointed. The bullying intensified. At Haverfordwest County Secondary School, they were the only black students, an unbearable distinction that made them even more visible and vulnerable. The isolation became absolute. It was here, in the cold gray classrooms of this Welsh school, that their silent pact was fully cemented. They stopped speaking to everyone, including their parents and their other siblings, Rosie, Greta, and David. The only exception was their younger sister, Rosie, with whom they would sometimes exchange a few whispered words. To everyone else, they were mute. Their silence was not passive. It was a wall, an aggressive and impenetrable fortress they built around themselves. They developed a strange synchronized walk, moving in perfect, eerie unison, as if controlled by a single mind. They would mirror each other's gestures, their postures, their subtle shifts in weight. To see them waltz, bulking down the street was a profoundly unsettling experience for the townspeople, who began to view them as local oddities, the strange silent twins. Their parents were at a loss. Aubrey and Gloria were loving but overwhelmed, struggling to understand what had happened to their once lively daughters. They tried to reason with them, to plead with them, but their words were met with the same unblinking, silent resistance. The family home became a place of quiet tension, the twins' silence casting a long, oppressive shadow over everyone. The world had rejected them, so they, in turn, rejected the world. They had each other, and in the deepening twilight of their shared isolation, they decided that was all they would ever need. The pact was sealed not with words spoken aloud, but in the silent language of their shared gaze, a mutual agreement to retreat from a hostile world into a universe of their own making, a universe for two. As the years passed, the twins' self-imposed isolation became a spectacle of eerie, ritualistic behavior that played out within the confines of their family home. In public, they were silent and still, but within the four walls of their shared bedroom, they existed in a state of constant synchronized motion. Their bond was a strange and disturbing performance, visible to their family but utterly incomprehensible. They moved as one, their steps falling in perfect rhythm. If one sister stood up, the other would rise in the exact same moment. If one folded her arms, the other would mimic the gesture instantly. They ate in a ritualized manner, one lifting a fork to her mouth only when the other did. Their parents and siblings watched this silent ballet with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. It was as if they were no longer two separate individuals, but two halves of a single tormented entity. This mirrored existence was not peaceful. It was a form of control. Their diaries would later reveal that this synchronization was a complex power struggle. One twin would often try to force the other to initiate an action, leading to long periods where they would remain frozen, locked in a battle of wills, waiting for the other to make the first move. One might decide not to eat until the other ate first, leading to a silent, stubborn standoff that could last for hours. The loser was the one who gave in, who broke the stillness. This was not just a game. It was a fundamental aspect of their relationship, a constant negotiation of dominance and submission. Their bedroom became their entire world, a sanctuary and a prison. The door was always closed, shutting out the rest of the family and the world beyond. Inside, they lived amidst a chaotic collection of dolls, books, and papers. This room was the stage for their private lives, a place where their silence gave way to a secret, vibrant existence. But even this existence was fraught with a deep and violent conflict. Their intense love for one another was matched by an equally intense hatred. They were each other's closest confidant and fiercest rival, the only source of comfort and the only source of pain. Their diaries are filled with entries detailing this violent duality. Jennifer would write, "She is my doom, my misery, my damnation. We have become fatal enemies in each other's eyes." June, in turn, would write of Jennifer, "She wants us to be equal. There is a murderous gleam in her eye. Dear Lord, I am scared of her. She is not normal. She is having a fit. She is screaming." Their arguments, which remained silent to the outside world, would escalate into shocking acts of violence. They would fight viciously, scratching, biting, and attempting to strangle one another. One incident involved Jennifer trying to drown June in a nearby river, while another saw June attempting to see Jennifer on fire. These were not mere sibling squabbles. They were desperate, existential battles for identity. Each twin felt that the other was consuming her, stealing her voice, her thoughts, her very soul. To be free, she had to destroy her mirror image, her other half. Yet, moments after these violent outbursts, they would be inseparable again, writing poetry together or tending to each other's wounds, trapped in a relentless cycle of love and hate. The school system's attempts to intervene were a catastrophic failure. Recognizing the extreme nature of their bond, authorities decided the only solution was to separate them. In 1977, they were sent to different boarding schools for troubled youth. The theory was that, once apart, they would be forced to engage with the outside world. The result was the opposite. Separated from their other half, both June and Jennifer descended into a state of catatonia. They became completely withdrawn, refusing to move, eat, or even get out of bed. They were like puppets with their strings cut, two halves of a whole that could not function independently. The staff at the schools were deeply disturbed by their behavior. The girls would lie motionless in their beds, their bodies rigid, their eyes vacant. It was a terrifying display of the depth of their codependence. The experiment was quickly deemed a failure, a cruel and misguided attempt to sever a bond that was, for better or for worse, the only thing holding them together. They were reunited, and upon seeing each other again, they immediately slipped back into their private, synchronized world. Their silent pact reinforced. The separation had taught them a powerful lesson. They could not survive apart, but it was becoming increasingly clear that they might not be able to survive together either. Their isolation in plain sight was complete. They existed in their family home, in their town, like ghosts, seen but never heard, present but entirely absent. They were two girls trapped in a feedback loop of their own creation, a mirrored world from which there seemed to be no escape. The only outlet for the immense pressure building inside them was the secret world they were creating, a world of words, stories, and a language all their own. Locked away in their bedroom, insulated from a world that had only ever offered them ridicule and isolation, June and Jennifer Gibbons cultivated a rich and complex inner life. This was their rebellion. Denied a voice in the outside world, they created a new one for themselves, a vibrant universe built from words, imagination, and a secret, shared language. To their family, they were silent specters haunting the upstairs of the house. But behind their closed door, they were prolific artists, communicating with a feverish intensity that stood in stark contrast to their public mutism. Their primary mode of communication was a high-speed, pigeon-like dialect, a mixture of Bajan Creole and modified English, which they spoke so quickly and with such a unique intonation that it was utterly indecipherable to anyone else. Even their own family, who could occasionally overhear the rapid patter of their speech through the bedroom door, could not understand a word. They called it their secret language, and it was the key to their private kingdom. It was the language of their games, their arguments, their shared dreams and fears. It was the ultimate act of exclusion, a linguistic fortress that ensured no one could ever truly enter their world. This was not a language they had invented from scratch in the way some twins do. Rather, it was an evolution of their early childhood speech, warped and accelerated into a private code, a deliberate tool to keep the world at bay. Their creative energy found its most powerful outlet in the written word. With money they received from their parents or from unemployment benefits, they enrolled in a mail-order creative writing course. This opened up a new dimension to their existence. Writing became their obsession, their therapy, and their only hope for connection and fame. They would spend hours each day locked in their room, sitting on their separate beds, furiously scribbling in their diaries. These diaries, which would eventually number in the millions of words, were their confessionals. In them, they poured out all the thoughts, emotions, and violent frustrations they kept hidden from the world. The diaries revealed two highly intelligent, observant, and deeply troubled young women, acutely aware of their strange circumstances. They wrote about their loneliness, their desire for love and recognition, and their suffocating paradoxical relationship with each other. June wrote, "Nobody suffers the way I do. Not with a sister. With a husband, yes. With a wife, yes. With a child, yes. But this sister of mine, a dark shadow robbing me of sunlight, is my one and only torment." Jennifer's entries were equally dark and filled with a sense of being possessed by her twin. "We have become fatal enemies in each other's eyes. We feel the irritating, killing nausea in each other's blood. I say to myself, can I get rid of my own shadow? Impossible or not possible. Without my shadow, would I die? Without my shadow, would I gain life, be free, or left to die?" These diaries were not just records of their feelings. They were a battleground where they fought for their individuality. Beyond their diaries, they channeled their ambitions into creating elaborate plays and stories, often acted out with a vast collection of dolls. These were not innocent childhood games. Their doll plays were complex, soap-operatic sagas filled with passion, betrayal, and drama. The dolls had intricate lives, families, and relationships. They were vessels for the twins' own unfulfilled desires and frustrations. Through the dolls, they could experience love, friendship, and conflict in a world they could control. This imaginative play soon evolved into a more serious literary ambition. They decided they would become famous novelists. They saved up their money to have their manuscripts professionally typed and bound. June's novel, titled The Pepsi-Cola Addict, tells the story of a teenager in Malibu who is seduced by a teacher and then sent to a reformatory, where his life spirals out of control. It's a story filled with American pop culture references, a desperate fantasy of a life of glamour and excitement, a world away from the grim reality of Haverfordwest. Jennifer wrote several works, including a novel called Discomania, about the vibrant and dangerous world of the disco scene, and a story called The Pugilist, as well as a radio play called Postman and Postwoman. They sent their manuscripts to publishers and literary agents, dreaming of being discovered, of their silent world being validated through literary fame. But the rejection letters piled up. Their writing, while imaginative and raw, was often grammatically chaotic and stylistically unconventional. The world of publishing had no place for them. Their secret language, so powerful in their private world, could not translate into the success they craved. The failure to break into the literary world was a devastating blow. They had poured all their hopes into their writing, believing it was their one ticket out of their silent prison. When that door closed, the darkness that had always lurked at the edges of their relationship began to creep in, leading them toward a more destructive form of self-expression. Their secret world, once a sanctuary, was about to spill out into the real one, with devastating consequences. The failure of their literary ambitions marked a dark turning point for June and Jennifer. The creative energy that had been funneled into their diaries and novels, once a source of hope and a potential escape, curdled into something destructive and reckless. Their fantasy world, filled with the American glamour they read about in magazines, began to demand a real-world expression. They were no longer content to live their lives through their characters. They wanted to experience the passion, the danger, and the romance for themselves. This desire for experience, combined with their profound social isolation and lack of conventional boundaries, set them on a collision course with the law. Their first forays into the outside world were clumsy and ill-fated attempts at connection. They became fixated on a pair of American brothers, the sons of a U.S. Navy serviceman stationed nearby. In their minds, these boys were figures straight out of their novels. Handsome, exciting, and a link to the idealized American life they dreamed of. They began to stalk the boys, following them and leaving them notes. For the first time, they broke their silent pact with the world, speaking to these boys in their desperate pursuit of a romantic connection. They succeeded in losing their virginity, but the encounters were not the passionate affairs they had imagined. They were fleeting, awkward, and ultimately unfulfilling. The connection they craved remained elusive. This brief, disappointing brush with the outside world did not break their isolation. It only seemed to deepen their frustration. When the American family eventually moved away, the twins were left with a void, a taste of a life they couldn't have. Their focus shifted from creation to destruction. Their dark obsessions, once confined to the violent entries in their diaries, now manifested in a spree of petty crime and vandalism. It began small, with shoplifting and minor acts of mischief, but their behavior quickly escalated. They felt an intoxicating sense of power in breaking the rules, in finally making a tangible impact on the world that had ignored them for so long. Their frustration and rage, which they had for years turned only on each other, was now directed outward. This culminated in a series of arson attacks. Over a period of 5 weeks, they committed 16 acts of arson, vandalism, and burglary in their local area. They set fire to a tractor dealership, a technical college, and various other buildings. These were not sophisticated crimes. They were acts of pure nihilistic rage. They would break into a building, cause as much damage as they could, and set it ablaze. For a few fleeting moments, they were no longer the silent, invisible twins. They were powerful, destructive forces, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. Their actions were a desperate scream for attention, a final, fiery rejection of a society that had cast them out. Their crime spree was inevitably short-lived. They were caught in the act of trying to burn down a local technical college and were arrested. The trial that followed was a public spectacle. The community of Haverfordwest was shocked to learn that the perpetrators of these crimes were the strange, silent girls who walked their streets in eerie unison. In court, they stood as they always had, silent, impassive, their gazes low, fixed on some distant point. They refused to speak to their lawyers or to the judge. Their only communication was with each other, in hushed whispers that no one could understand. The court was faced with a profound dilemma. What do you do with 2 defendants who refuse to acknowledge the proceedings, who seem to exist in a world entirely separate from our own? Their silence, which had once been a shield, was now interpreted as a sign of profound mental disturbance. The judge, swayed by psychiatric reports that diagnosed them with psychopathic personality disorders, decided against a prison sentence. Instead, he sentenced them to be detained indefinitely at Broadmoor Hospital, one of Britain's most notorious high-security psychiatric institutions. The sentence was a tragic misunderstanding of their condition. They were not psychopaths in the clinical sense. They were 2 deeply isolated and troubled young women whose cries for help had taken a destructive form. But the system had no other box to put them in. At the age of 19, June and Jennifer Gibbons were taken from their home and locked away in a place designed to house the country's most violent and criminally insane men. The gates of Broadmoor closed behind them, and their private world, already a prison, became a real one, made of concrete and steel. The transfer to Broadmoor Hospital was, for June and Jennifer, a descent into a new level of hell. Broadmoor was not a therapeutic sanctuary. It was a fortress, a high-security institution designed for the containment of individuals deemed a danger to society. Its population consisted largely of male murderers, serial rapists, and schizophrenics. The twins, guilty of arson and vandalism, were wildly out of place, their quiet, internalized turmoil a stark contrast to the overt and often violent psychoses of the other patients. They were too small, frightened young women thrust into a brutal, hyper-masculine environment. The very architecture of the place was oppressive, with its long, sterile corridors, heavy locked doors, and barred windows. The life they had known, insular and controlled as it was shattered. They were stripped of their clothes, their possessions, and most importantly, their proximity to each other. The authorities at Broadmoor, like the school officials before them, believed that the key to treating the twins was to sever their toxic bond. They were placed in separate wards, on opposite sides of the sprawling hospital complex. This forced separation, meant to be therapeutic, was a catastrophic miscalculation. It plunged them into a state of profound despair and psychological torment that far exceeded anything they had experienced before. For the first time in their lives, they were truly alone. They responded in the only way they knew how, by withdrawing completely. They would spend their days in a state of suspended animation, often lying in bed in rigid catatonic postures, facing the wall. They would refuse to eat, refuse to move, refuse to engage with staff or other patients. When they were taken to the communal areas, they would stand frozen for hours, sometimes mimicking the poses of statues, their bodies locked in a silent protest against their separation. Their diaries from this period are a harrowing record of their suffering. June wrote, "I'm in a living hell, a BROADMOOR hell. This place is draining my life away. When I think of Jennifer, a stabbing pain enters my heart." Jennifer's entries echoed this agony. "I really am going to die. My heart is already dead. It is as black as a dead rat. It is not my heart that is to blame. It is my sister June." The separation did not break their bond. It seemed to mystically strengthen it. They claimed they could still feel each other's presence, that they communicated telepathically across the hospital grounds. June described feeling Jennifer's pain as if it were her own, a physical ache that never subsided. The psychiatry, staff at Broadmoor were baffled. The twins defied easy diagnosis. Their case files grew thick with conflicting reports and observations. They were subjected to high doses of antipsychotic medications, powerful drugs that left them lethargic and dulled their senses, but did nothing to break their silence or their bond. The drugs caused severe side effects, including tardive dyskinesia, a neurological disorder characterized by involuntary, repetitive body movements. Their once synchronized, deliberate walk was replaced by a slow, medicated shuffle. Their case was taken over by a therapist named Anne Treherne, who tried to build a rapport with them, but even she found it nearly impossible to penetrate their wall of silence. However, a turning point came with the arrival of Marjorie Wallace, a journalist from the Sunday Times. Wallace was fascinated by their story and managed to gain their trust in a way no one else had. Over time, they began to communicate with her, first through letters and then in whispered conversations. They allowed her to read their voluminous diaries, opening up their secret world to an outsider for the first time. It was through Wallace that the full, tragic complexity of their relationship was revealed. She saw them not as psychopaths, but as two intelligent, creative individuals trapped in a devastating psychological cage of their own making. Life in Broadmoor was a grim routine of medication, therapy sessions that went nowhere, and long, empty hours. The twins were occasionally allowed to see each other, and these reunions were fraught with the same intense, contradictory emotions that had defined their lives. They would embrace each other, desperate for the comfort of their other half, only to descend into their old patterns of silent power struggles and whispered arguments. They remained an enigma to the staff, who could not comprehend the depth of their codependence. For 11 long years, they were held at Broadmoor. 11 years of their youth, lost to the gray clinical world of a high-security hospital. They had been sent there for rehabilitation, but the institution seemed only to calcify their pathology. As the years wore on, a new chilling idea began to form in their minds. They came to believe that their shared existence was a curse, that two of them could never truly be free. One life was shadowing the other, one soul eclipsing its twin. And as they contemplated the possibility of a future beyond the walls of Broadmoor, they came to a terrifying conclusion. A final dark pact that would offer one of them a chance at a normal life, but at the ultimate price. As the years in Broadmoor stretched into a decade, a chilling and fatalistic idea began to take root in the twins' shared consciousness. They had entered the hospital as teenagers and were now women in their late 20s. The powerful antipsychotic drugs had taken a toll on their bodies, and the psychological weight of their confinement was immense. Their hope for a future, for a life beyond the gray walls and locked doors, was fading. It was during this period of despair that their complex relationship entered its final, most macabre phase. The love-hate dynamic, the struggle for individual identity that had defined their entire lives, began to crystallize into a single, terrifying thought. One of them had to die for the other to be free. This was not a sudden revelation, but a slow, creeping realization that they documented with haunting clarity in their diaries and in their conversations with the journalist Marjorie Wallace. They had come to see themselves as a single entity, unnaturally divided into two bodies. This unity, which had once been their shield, now felt like a curse. They believed that two twins, two selves, could not coexist in the world. One was a shadow of the other, and to step into the light, the shadow had to be eliminated. It was Jennifer who first gave voice to this grim prediction. In a conversation with Marjorie Wallace, she spoke with a calm, unnerving certainty. Marjorie, she said, I'm going to have to die." When Wallace, shocked, asked why, Jennifer explained their theory. She stated that she and June had made a pact. They had decided that upon their release from Broadmoor, one of them would have to give up her life. It was the only way for the other to be liberated from the suffocating bond that had imprisoned them both. June, she explained, could not be truly free as long as she, Jennifer, was alive. Jennifer's presence, her very existence, was a weight on June's soul, preventing her from ever speaking, from ever living a normal life. Therefore, she had to make the ultimate sacrifice. This was not presented as a suicide pact in the conventional sense. It was framed as a necessary, almost metaphysical, transaction. A life for a life. A death for a chance at freedom. The decision of who was to die was, according to Jennifer, hers to make. As the older twin, the one who had entered the world first, she felt it was her responsibility. June confirmed this strange agreement. She too believed that their coexistence was impossible. In her diary, she wrote about Jennifer's decision with a chilling acceptance. "We are one, we are two. We will be two, and we will be one. Jennifer has got to die. Jennifer has got to die." The idea became an obsession, a recurring theme in their conversations and writings. It was a fantasy of liberation that was inextricably linked with death. This was the final twisted evolution of their lifelong power struggle. For years, they had fought to dominate each other, to be the one in control. Now, the ultimate act of control, the ultimate sacrifice, was to be Jennifer's death. Marjorie Wallace was deeply disturbed by these conversations. She tried to reason with them, to tell them it was a morbid fantasy born of their desperate situation. But the twins were resolute. They spoke of it as an inevitability, a pre-written final chapter to their tragic story. Their life together had been a battle for individuality, and this was the only logical conclusion they could envision. In early 1993, after 11 long years, the news they had been waiting for finally arrived. The authorities had decided to transfer them from the high-security environment of Broadmoor to the Caswell Clinic, a lower security facility in Bridgend, Wales. This was a significant step toward their eventual release. It was a moment that should have been filled with hope, but for the twins, it was a moment of terrifying finality. The prediction, the pact they had made, was now imminent. The day of the transfer approached, casting a dark shadow over their impending freedom. In her final days at Broadmoor, Jennifer's behavior became even more strange. She seemed to be preparing for her end. She told Marjorie Wallace, "I'm free. I'm going to die. We've been in Broadmoor for a long time. It's not right for two people to be in here for so long, so I'm dying. I've been saying I'm going to die for a few months now." The prediction, once a dark fantasy whispered in the sterile confines of the hospital, was about to be tested in the real world. The stage was set for the final, inexplicable act of their shared life. As they prepared to leave Broadmoor behind forever, one question hung in the air, unspoken but understood by both sisters. Would Jennifer's prophecy come true? On the 9th of March, 1993, the day of their long-awaited transfer finally dawned. For June and Jennifer, it was a day charged with strange and somber energy. After more than a decade institutionalized, they were leaving Broadmoor behind. They were being moved to the Caswell Clinic, a transitional facility that represented the first real step towards freedom. But as they boarded the bus for the journey to Wales, the sense of hope was overshadowed by the grim pact that had been made. The prophecy hung between them, a silent third passenger on the ride to their new life. During the journey, Jennifer behaved in a way that was unusual even for her. She was reportedly relaxed, almost cheerful. She laid her head on June's shoulder and appeared to fall asleep. To the staff accompanying them, it might have seemed like a moment of peaceful respite for a young woman who had known so much turmoil. But June would later describe it differently. She said that as Jennifer slept, her breathing was shallow, and her body felt cold. When they arrived at the Caswell Clinic a few hours later, Jennifer could not be roused. Her eyes were open, but she was unresponsive. She had slipped into a sudden and inexplicable coma. Panic ensued. The clinic staff rushed Jennifer to the nearby Princess of Wales Hospital. Doctors worked frantically to revive her, but their efforts were in vain. Just a few hours after arriving at the clinic that was meant to be her new beginning, at 6:15 p.m., Jennifer Gibbons was pronounced dead. She was just 29 years old. The suddenness of her death was a profound shock to everyone. She had no known life-threatening physical illnesses. An autopsy was immediately ordered to determine the cause of death. The medical examiner conducted a thorough investigation, looking for any sign of poison, drugs, or physical injury that could explain her collapse. The results only deepened the mystery. There was no evidence of foul play. There were no illegal substances in her system, nor was there an overdose of her prescribed medication. The only significant finding was that her heart was inflamed. The official cause of death was recorded as acute myocarditis, a sudden and severe inflammation of the heart muscle. But what had caused the myocarditis? That question could not be answered. Myocarditis is typically caused by a viral infection, but no such virus was found in Jennifer's body. There was no physiological explanation for why her heart had suddenly and catastrophically failed. It was a medical anomaly, a death without a discernible cause. The news was delivered to June. Her twin, her shadow, her other half, was gone. Her reaction was as complex and mysterious as their entire life had been. Marjorie Wallace, who visited her shortly after, found her not in a state of hysterical grief, but in a strange state of calm, almost triumphant release. The pact had been fulfilled. Jennifer had kept her promise. June's first words to Wallace were chilling in their affirmation of the prophecy. "I'm free at last, liberated," she said. "And at last Jennifer has given up her life for me." For June, her sister's inexplicable death was not a tragedy, but a sacrifice. It was the final selfless act that had severed their bond and set her free. The medical world was left with an unsolved puzzle. How does a healthy young woman's heart simply stop for no reason? Was it a rare, undiagnosed condition? Could the years of heavy antipsychotic medication have caused hidden damage to her heart muscle, a ticking time bomb that chose that exact moment to detonate? Or was there something else at play, something that medical science could not measure or explain? The sudden death of Jennifer Gibbons remains the central haunting enigma of the silent twin story. It was a death foretold, a prophecy fulfilled, leaving behind a grieving but liberated sister, and a mystery that continues to defy all logical explanation. In the days and weeks following Jennifer's mysterious death, a remarkable transformation began to take place in June. The silent, withdrawn woman who had spent nearly 3 decades locked in a world of two began, astonishingly, to emerge. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The suffocating pact of silence, which had been forged in the crucible of their shared childhood and hardened over decades of isolation, was broken. Jennifer was gone, and with her, the silence seemed to have vanished as well. Almost immediately, June began to speak, not in the hushed, rapid-fire secret language she had shared with her sister, but in clear, coherent English. She spoke to the staff at the Caswell Clinic, she spoke to her doctors, and she spoke at length with Marjorie Wallace. It was a startling and profound awakening. The world, which had for so long only known her as a silent mirrored half of a single entity, was now hearing her voice for the first time, and what she had to say was a confirmation of the strange, dark pact that had defined her life and ended her sister's. She described a feeling of immense relief, a sense of liberation that was mingled with her grief. She told Wallace that on the day of the transfer from Broadmoor, Jennifer had been acting strangely serene. As her sister slept on her shoulder in the bus, June felt that something profound was happening. She believed that Jennifer was consciously willing herself to die, fulfilling their agreement. Jennifer was a real twin, a true twin, June explained. She gave her life for me. She talked about her newfound freedom with a sense of wonder. Simple things like choosing what to wear or what to eat without having to mirror her sister were novel and liberating experiences. The constant silent battle of wills that had governed her every move was over. She was no longer a half, but a whole. Her awakening was not just linguistic. It was a complete shift in her being. Her posture changed. The rigid, frozen demeanor was replaced by a more relaxed and open presence. She began to engage with the world around her, to smile, to make eye contact. The staff at the clinic, who had only known her through the grim reports from Broadmoor, were amazed. It was as if they were meeting a completely different person. June's decision to speak allowed her to finally give her own account of her life with Jennifer. She spoke of the intense, consuming love they shared, but also of the deep-seated resentment and hatred that had poisoned their bond. She confirmed that their life had been a constant power struggle. It was a game, she said, a very selfish game. She explained that one twin always had to lose for the other to win, and that this dynamic had made a normal life for both of them impossible. Jennifer's death, in her view, was the final move in this lifelong game, the ultimate act of sacrifice that allowed June to win the prize they both craved, a single, individual life. She visited Jennifer's grave, which was inscribed with a line from a poem she had written. "We once were two, we two made one. We no more two, through life be one. Rest in peace." The epitaph was a perfect summary of their paradoxical existence. Two who were one, and who could only become one again in death. June was eventually released from the Caswell Clinic and went to live with her parents in Wales. She continued to build a quiet life for herself, free from the institutional walls that had confined her for so long. She granted a few interviews in the years following her release, speaking calmly and articulately about her past. She expressed a desire to put the trauma behind her and to live a normal, anonymous life. Her awakening was the final startling chapter of their shared story. It was the fulfillment of the prophecy, the proof in her mind that Jennifer's sacrifice had been necessary. But for the outside world, it only deepened the mystery. Did Jennifer truly will herself to die? Could a psychological bond be so powerful that it could manifest as a physical, fatal event? Or was June's sudden recovery a complex psychological reaction to the trauma of her sister's death, a reframing of a tragic medical event into a narrative of liberation and sacrifice? The awakening of June Gibbons was as profound and unsettling as the silence that had preceded it, leaving us to wonder about the unseen forces that governed the lives of the silent twins. The story of June and Jennifer Gibbons is a labyrinth of psychological, medical, and existential questions, and it resists any single simple explanation. Over the decades, experts and observers have proposed numerous theories to try and make sense of their extraordinary lives and Jennifer's inexplicable death. These theories range from established psychiatric diagnoses to more speculative, almost supernatural, interpretations of their bond. Each one offers a lens through which to view their case, but none can fully capture the haunting totality of their experience. The most straightforward explanations lie in the field of psychiatry. The twins' refusal to speak to almost anyone is a clear case of severe and prolonged selective mutism, an anxiety disorder where a person who is capable of speech is unable to speak in specific social situations. For the twins, this was triggered by the trauma of social exclusion, bullying, and the racism they experienced as young children. Their mutism became a defense mechanism, a way to exert control in a world where they felt powerless. This, however, was clearly compounded by a much rarer and more complex condition. Many experts believe the twins were a classic example of folie à deux, or shared delusional disorder. This is a rare psychiatric syndrome in which a delusion is transmitted from one individual to another. In a typical case, there is a dominant person who initially forms the delusional belief, and a more submissive person who adopts it. In the case of June and Jennifer, their relationship was a constantly shifting dynamic of dominance and submission. Their shared delusion was the belief that they were not two separate individuals, but a single entity, and that they could not exist independently in the world. This belief governed their synchronized movements, their violent conflicts, and ultimately, their fatal pact. Their writings are filled with language that supports this idea, describing each other as shadows, mirrors, and inescapable parts of themselves. Their identities had become so enmeshed, so pathologically intertwined, that the boundaries between them had completely dissolved. Other potential diagnoses include schizoid personality disorder, which is characterized by a lack of interest in social relationships, a tendency towards a solitary or sheltered lifestyle, secretiveness, and emotional coldness. This certainly aligns with their public behavior. However, their rich, violent, and passionate inner world, as revealed in their diaries, complicates this diagnosis. Their problem was not a lack of emotion, but an overabundance of it, channeled exclusively toward each other. The environmental factors cannot be overstated. Their story is a tragic case study in the devastating effects of social isolation and prejudice. As the only Black children in their Welsh community, they were made to feel like perpetual outsiders. Their silence began as a reaction to a hostile world. It's possible that without this initial trauma, their intense twin bond might have developed in a healthier, less pathological way. Their condition was not created in a vacuum. It was forged in the fires of a society that failed to protect and include them. The mystery of Jennifer's death invites another set of theories, this time from the medical field. The official cause of death, acute myocarditis of unknown origin, is deeply unsatisfying. One plausible medical theory is that the long-term high-dose administration of powerful antipsychotic drugs at Broadmoor caused cumulative damage to her heart. Tardive dyskinesia, the movement disorder they developed, is a known side effect of these drugs, and it is conceivable that they could have other, rarer, and more fatal long-term effects on the cardiovascular system. It's possible that the stress and excitement of the transfer from Broadmoor was the final trigger that caused her already weakened heart to fail. This would make her death a tragic case of iatrogenic harm, an illness caused by medical treatment. However, the autopsy found no definitive proof of this, leaving it as a compelling but unproven hypothesis. Finally, we are left with the theories that step beyond the boundaries of conventional science. This is the explanation that the twins themselves subscribe to, the idea of a metaphysical or supernatural bond. In this view, Jennifer's death was not a medical event, but an act of will, a psychogenic death. This is the idea that a person can die because they have lost the will to live, or in this case, because she willed her life force to depart. History and anthropology are filled with accounts of voodoo death or curse death, where individuals from certain cultures have died from no apparent physical cause after believing they have been cursed. Could Jennifer's absolute belief in the necessity of her death, a belief shared and reinforced by her twin, have triggered a real physiological shutdown in her body? Could the human mind, in a state of such extreme psychological intensity, have the power to stop the heart? This is a deeply unsettling thought, one that pushes the limits of our understanding of the mind-body connection. Was Jennifer's death a sacrifice, a psychic event, the ultimate testament to a bond so powerful it could defy the laws of biology? This theory, while impossible to prove, is perhaps the one that feels most true to the strange mythical narrative the twins constructed for themselves. Was it a psychiatric disorder, a tragic medical accident, or a supernatural pact? The truth may be a complex tapestry woven from threads of all three, a mystery that, like the twins themselves, will forever remain locked in its own silent, secret world. The story of the silent twins endures not just as a bizarre case study, but as a profound and unsettling cultural artifact. Decades after Jennifer's death, their tale continues to captivate and disturb audiences, psychologists, artists, and writers. It has been the subject of Marjorie Wallace's definitive book, television documentaries, stage plays, and even a feature film. The legacy of June and Jennifer Gibbons is complex, a haunting echo that forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about identity, conformity, and the failures of the systems we build to care for the vulnerable. Their story resonates so deeply because it operates on multiple levels. It is a heartbreaking psychological thriller, a real-life gothic horror story about two souls trapped in a mirrored prison. The eerie synchronization, the secret language, the violent love-hate relationship, and the death pact prophecy. It all feels like something born from the mind of Edgar Allan Poe, yet it is all tragically real. The narrative is so powerful, so filled with archetypal themes of duality and the struggle for self, that it transcends its own time and place. For the field of psychology, the Gibbons case remains a profound and cautionary tale. It is an extreme example of selective mutism and folie à deux, pushing these concepts to their absolute limits. It serves as a stark reminder of the catastrophic consequences of social isolation and the failure of institutions to understand and treat complex, atypical conditions. The twins' journey through the educational and psychiatric systems of the 1970s and 80s highlights a profound lack of imagination and empathy. They were labeled, medicated, and institutionalized, but they were never truly understood. The decision to send them to Broadmoor, in particular, is now seen as a catastrophic failure of judgment, a brutal and inappropriate response to the crimes of two deeply disturbed young women. Their legacy is a challenge to the psychiatric profession to look beyond convenient labels and to listen, even when the patient is silent. It forces a reckoning with the ethics of institutionalization and the potentially devastating effects of long-term medication. Beyond the clinical, their legacy is also a literary one. June and Jennifer were, above all else, writers. In a world that refused them a voice, they found one on the page. Their diaries and novels are not just case notes, they are raw, powerful, and often brilliant works of outsider art. They provide an unfiltered view into their tormented inner world, filled with astonishing creativity, intelligence, and a desperate yearning for recognition. Their writing is a testament to the indestructible nature of the human spirit's need for self-expression. They may have been silent, but they were not without a voice. Their words are their most enduring legacy, a message in a bottle from their lonely island, allowing us to hear them more clearly now than anyone could when they were alive. Analyzing their work gives us the deepest insight into their state of mind, their ambitions, and the suffocating nature of their bond. It elevates their story from one of mere pathology to one of frustrated artistry. Today, the story of the silent twins continues to unsettle us because it probes the very core of what it means to be an individual. We define ourselves in relation to others, but what happens when that relationship becomes all-consuming? What happens when the person you love most is also the person who is destroying you? Their life was a terrifying, real-world experiment in the dissolution of the self. They force us to ask where one person ends and another begins. The final, chilling mystery of Jennifer's death ensures their story will never fade. It is the ultimate question mark, the event that elevates their tale into the realm of the mythic. It defies our rational scientific understanding of the world and leaves us with a profound sense of unease. It suggests that there are forces at play in the human psyche and in the bonds between people that are more powerful and more mysterious than we can possibly comprehend. The legacy of June and Jennifer Gibbons is one of silence and of words, of love and of hate, of imprisonment and of a final, tragic liberation. They were two brilliant, tormented souls who created a world so complete and so insular that it ultimately destroyed them. Their story is a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears about loneliness, identity, and the darkness that can lie within the most intimate of connections. Was this a medical mystery, a psychiatric tragedy, a supernatural bond, or something even darker, something that lies beyond our capacity to name? What do you think happened between the silent twins?